Welcome back to the Freud lecture in personality theories. We just finished with Freud's history. Now let's begin with his theory. Some of the major portions of his theory include the conscious mind, the preconscious mind, the unconscious mind, the id, the ego and the superego, eros, libido, and thanatos, and we'll also look at the psychosexual stages. So let's continue. The conscious mind is that portion of your mind of which you are aware. It includes memories that are currently crossing your mind, the present perception of your environment, your fantasies, and feelings. The preconscious mind includes material you are not currently considering, but are so close to the surface that naming them will make you think of them. It includes all the things that are easy to bring into consciousness, such as, what is your name? What are your mother's name? And your phone number. The unconscious mind includes everything not readily available to your awareness. These include your drives, instincts, and traumatic memories. It is the source of many of our motivations. It is available to the person mostly in disguise. It shows itself through simile or parable, not directly. Unconsciously, we realize specific needs, such as we must survive and reproduce. To do this, we must eat and drink and have sex and avoid pain. These needs are represented by fundamental drives called eros, libido, and thanatos. In Freud's theory, there are three instinctive drives and reservoirs of energy which perpetuate the life of the individual and the life of the species. As we just discussed, they are eros, libido, and thanatos. Let's look at each one of these one at a time. First is the drive for sexuality and life. It drives people toward acts that are sexual and life-giving. Eros makes a person want to experience sensual pleasure or any other kind of pleasure and helps them come up with creative ways to achieve their goals. Libido is the energy behind the eros. It is not a drive of itself, but the energy behind the drive. Libido comes from the Latin word meaning I desire. It is a reservoir of energy that continuously ebbs and flows. It's like the water behind a dam. The higher the water is above the turbines in the dam, the more energy there is to drive the turbines and create electricity. In the same way, the more energy there is stored in your libido, the more you are driven to find a release. At some point, it must be released. It is the eros which uses that energy and releases it. Thanatos drives people toward aggressive and destructive behaviors. Freud did not believe humans possessed Thanatos, but as we will see later, Adler became popular for his inclusion of a destructive force. This also drove a wedge between Adler and Freud, and they became enemies. Remember when I said Freud had to be in complete control and he was good at making enemies? This is one of those situations. So Freud was forced to include some kind of destructive force, but he could not just leave it at that. Freud came to believe that the goal of all motivation is to be at peace. And the most at peace we are is in death. So he proposed that we have a death instinct. There is some Buddhist influence on Freud. Freud referred to the nirvana principle. This is the act of becoming non-existent, which is part of the death instinct. We have a need to seek nothingness or become one with the void. This principle relates to our death wish. When the desire for life and death collide, we abuse alcohol or drugs, or we attempt to escape in books or movies. We shun reality. This can also create suicidal wishes or tendencies, which can also lead to substance abuse, or we can become aggressive, cruel, and destructive. Three important personality structures are Das Es, Ich, and Über-Ich, or, as we call them in English, the id, the ego, and the superego. Doesn't the German sound better? During translation, we lose something, and sometimes the meaning is changed as well. Let's look at these personality items. The id, or es, which simply means it, is the primitive unconscious portion of personality, which houses most of our basic drives and stores repressed memories. The primary process, as he described it, occurs when the nervous system translates our needs into motivational forces, otherwise known as our instincts, drives, and wishes. The id is the cause of all hedonistic activities and is present at birth. What is hedonistic? What does it mean? Sometimes I use words that some of my students may not know, so let me describe this. In this case, hedonistic means engaging in the seeking of pleasure. A hedonistic person is one who is totally involved in self-gratification, through sex, yes, but also through any other means. A hedonistic person will not do anything unless it is pleasurable for them to do so. Pleasure and happiness are the only goals worth pursuing for a hedonistic person. Nothing else matters. It follows the pleasure principle, which is the demand to take care of needs immediately. There's no delay of gratification here for the id. The infant is nearly pure id. If you think about infants, they want it, and they want it now. The superego, or Über-Ich, which simply means over I, is the mind's storehouse of values, moral attitudes, laws, and rules learned from parents and society. We are told, don't lie. This is a rule that shall never be broken according to the superego. It is the same as the common notion of conscience. For those who did not have a deprived childhood and saw Disney's Pinocchio, it is our Jiminy Cricket. The superego also contains the ego ideal, which is the model of the perfect person. The ego ideal is an idealized representation of the parents' and society's rules. The Über-Ich can be called the police force of the mind. The superego exists in all portions of consciousness and grows with every new rule we learn. It's not completed until about age 7. The superego creates pride, shame, and guilt to persuade the person to follow its rules. These rules conflict with the id. The id wants something and doesn't care how we get it. We learn there are half-truths and white lies which we use at times to get what we want, but they break the rule. Let's never lie. The superego and the id fight all the time, and the conflict creates the ego. The ego, or Ich, which simply means I, is the conscious, aware, and rational part of personality, charged with keeping peace between the conflicting superego and id. This is the moderator of the mind, a sort of perverted Jiminy Cricket, and it directs the behavior that we decide the world should see. So it is creating a mask that we allow the world to see. It limits what we want the world to know about us. It works through reality and reason. People who cannot reason well or who are not grounded in reality will be unable to use the ego to create a personality that is acceptable to society. They will have a pathology. The secondary process, according to Freud, occurs when the ego attempts to find ways to satisfy the wishes of the id without breaking the rules of the superego. The ego has access in all areas of consciousness, but it mostly is in the conscious area. The reality principle says, take care of the needs as soon as an appropriate object is found. So we are maybe very thirsty, but we may not be able to drink milk, which is the only thing we have available due to allergies. So we take care of the need as soon as we find something appropriate to drink. This slide is a representation of the parts of the mind using an iceberg to demonstrate that the id is huge and unseen. The part of the iceberg that is seen is a very small portion of the iceberg. The mass of the iceberg is mostly underwater. This is like our personality, according to Freud. What the world sees and what is consciously available to ourselves is only a very small part of our personality. According to Freud, anxiety comes from the turbulent interplay of the confliction between the id and the superego. When the ego feels unpleasant emotional discomfort and is overwhelmed by conflicting demands, we feel anxiety. The ego recognizes what the superego and the id want, and many times we cannot find an appropriate way to resolve this conflict, which causes emotional discomfort and anxiety. Anxiety can come in three forms: realistic anxiety, moral anxiety, and neurotic anxiety. Let's look at those three. Realistic anxiety is real fear. Yes, there are some things that you should be afraid of. There is a reason for the fear of an actual item in the world sometimes. Moral anxiety is the fear of social punishment and the fear that we will not meet the demands of the world. It is social fear and the fear of punishment. It is represented by shame and guilt. People with too much shame and guilt in their lives are expressing this as a result of their moral anxiety, according to Freud. Neurotic anxiety, which is Freud's favorite, of course, is a nervous fear. It is the fear of being overwhelmed by not actually being overwhelmed. So you have a feeling that something is going to happen and you will not be able to handle it, and yet nothing ever actually happens. It is the feeling that you are about to lose it or have a nervous breakdown. To counter anxiety, we use ego defenses. Ego defenses mechanisms are largely unconscious mental strategies employed to reduce the experience of conflict or anxiety. This idea may have come to Sigmund from his daughter. Anna Freud was a well-known child psychologist, and some of the ego defenses have been attributed to her rather than her father. However, Freud did accept and include them in his theory. They include denial, rationalization, reaction formation, repression, sublimation, displacement, and regression. There are others, but we'll just cover these 8 right now. Denial is the act of refusing to accept the realities of a situation. This can often prove unhealthy when denial is not soon replaced by acceptance, because the longer the gravity of a situation is ignored, usually the more serious it can become. For example, if one is in denial of a disease diagnosis, the disease may become worse as it goes untreated, especially for those who are told they have a fatal disease. Disease is perhaps the best example for this defense mechanism, as the diagnosis of a disease is the most commonly denied reality, especially in cases where the disease is fatal. In fact, denial is acknowledged as the first stage in the process of death and dying. The 5 stages are being in denial, anger, bargaining with God, depression, and acceptance. However, these are not the specific order in which they occur. When a list is communicated, it is by necessity communicated in some order, but that order is imposed by our means of communication. This list was never meant to represent the order in which these stages occur. Projection is similar to denial in that one is unwilling to accept the reality of one's own self. In projection, the faults and shortcomings and urges of an individual are seen not as present in oneself, but rather in others. Your id wanted to do one thing, and your superego prevailed in stopping it, but the ego is now upset because you never should have even considered such an action. We can reduce that anxiety produced in the ego by sharing the pain. In other words, everyone is doing this, so it must be okay that I felt like doing it. For example, an employee at a convenience store considers overcharging customers for items and keeping the difference for himself, but thinks better of it and decides against it. But his ego's upset because he even thought about that problem. So in order to reduce the problem of the ego, the anxiety produced, suddenly the employee begins to notice, incorrectly, that all the other workers are doing just that, grossly overcharging customers and pocketing the money. Makes him feel better, right? But it's not actually happening. He's projecting that information onto the feelings or those behaviors onto another person. Another good example would be that a man feels extremely hateful towards a relative over a petty conflict, but then reluctantly decides to forget the incident ever happened. The man then begins to feel that his family no longer loves him or wishes to do him harm. The next is rationalization. In rationalization, you come up with various explanations to justify the situation while denying your feelings. A lot of people use rationalization many different times in their lives, and no one uses only one of these defense mechanisms, but we do tend to use one more often than others. In rationalization, one often fabricates a great deal of information as opposed to facing the reality of a situation. This particular defense mechanism works extremely well because it totally rids the individual of any sense of guilt, remorse, or responsibility. Therefore, it must be avoided as it attempts the individual to hide from reality. For example, a woman is fired for missing an excessive amount of days at work without explanation and for poor performance while she was on the job. She rationalizes that it was due to the fact that her boss hated her, the other employees felt threatened by her ability, and that the company discriminates heavily on the basis of race or sex. She might think, I'm going to sue for sexual discrimination or something else. The real cause of the problem is the woman's alcoholism. And this is one of the biggest problems of alcoholics because they refuse to accept that the alcohol controls them instead of them controlling the alcohol. It is the first step in AA to get the person to recognize they are an alcoholic and to stop rationalizing their problems to other things. Now, I've passed 15 minutes here, so I'm going to stop and pick it back up again in the next Freud lecture.